Now, Britain is in decline and its people are becoming strangers in their own land. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's the lived experience of millions of people out there in our country. A staggering 43% of Brits, according to a recent poll, say they sometimes feel like strangers in their own country. Among those who plan to vote for reform at the next election, that number rockets to over 70%. Well, what does it say about the state of our nation when its people no longer feel at home, when they no longer feel that they recognise the country that surrounds them? Keir Starmer was recently widely criticised and even compared to Enoch Powell by some on the left for calling Britain an island of strangers. Yet for once, the data backs him up. Net migration has soared in recent years, leaving us with the astonishing fact that 1 in every 25 people now living in Britain arrived in the last 4 years. Just think about that. And even more shockingly, of the nearly 800,000 people who migrated into the country from outside of Europe last year, only 14%, 1/4, came primarily to work in this country. Disconnectedness is now part of our national identity. According to another pollster, more in common, 62% of Brits now think that the country is becoming more divided. And not even a third of our young 18 to 24-year-olds think that most people can be trusted. Our social fabric appears to be giving way. And the economics behind all of this are pretty grim too. The Centre for Research in Social Policy shows that 24 million people in this country, over a third of the country, now live below the minimum income standard. That's the worst figure since records began. And Britain has suffered, don't forget, also the sharpest decline in living standards since the Second World War. 2/3 of all households are now living below the minimum income standard. And this indeed is cause for concern. We are now a country where our wages are not covering our rent, where food banks have become normalised, and where nearly half of our children are living in households without enough to meet basic needs. And this despair is not just economic. As I've said time and time again on this show, it is becoming existential. Even a Hope Not Hate poll backed by labour groups and trade unions recently found that the most common word Brits use to describe their own country is declining. 1/4 of British people think that Britain is now weak, and another quarter say that our country is directionless. The institutions that once brought us together, our public services, our high streets, our local associations, are crumbling around us. Community organisations appear to have vanished. Owning or even renting your own home has become an unrealistic fever dream for many, especially our young people. Indeed, just today, the Office for National Statistics found that average rent in England is unaffordable and is at its worst in parts of London. As the Adam Smith Institute's Maxwell Marlowe has put it, the time to build was yesterday, is today, and will be tomorrow. Also, take a look at this story. If this doesn't exemplify Britain in decline, if this isn't a powerful symbol of what on earth is going on in our country, then I don't know what is. As Labour's renationalisation of some railways comes into force, The Telegraph today revealed that Britain's first renationalised train will be a rail replacement bus service. A replacement bus service from Surbiton all the way to Woking on the Waterloo line. A replacement bus service slap in the middle of the London commuter belt. Is it any wonder that we cannot stop the small boats in the Channel? Meanwhile, Hope Not Hate, though apparently unwilling to recognise or address whether there is any sort of problem surrounding mass immigration, shares the same finding. People in this country feel ignored, disconnected, forgotten. Yet they seem unwilling to name one of the big drivers of this fragmentation, the repercussions of record levels of migration and the erosion of our national culture. This is a hard truth. Our economy is failing, our social fabric is fraying, and our identity appears to be dissolving before our very eyes. And the rest of the world is starting to notice. American political commentator Charlie Kirk visited London earlier this week, and here's what he had to say. If you want to renew your love of America, spend 3 days in the UK. You will kiss the ground when you get back home. Britain is becoming disconnected from its people. The numbers are clear. The question is, will we keep pretending this is normal, or will our leaders finally take the bold action that is needed to reunite a country that is now at risk of losing itself? As ever, let me know your views at gbnews.com/yoursay. Of course, reach us on X at GB News. But I'm joined now by historian, broadcaster, friend of the show, regular on State of the Nation, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, and of course my panel, political commentator Esther Krakue, and media and campaigns manager for the Good Growth Foundation, Billy Coulson. Rafe, there's a cultural problem in this country. The polling seems to be backing that up this week. As I've said, we've had that more in common polling. Nearly half the country feeling like strangers in their own country. We've got that Hope Not Hate polling showing that significant numbers feel disconnected. What is driving this?
Well, we've been in decline since 2008, I would say, but there is this general feeling in the nation.
Not 1997?
Well, actually, it was a bit later before mass immigration started under Blair. But yes, the Long March began in 97. But there's a real sense of decay and stagnation around us. And it's on the local level, it's on the national level, but it's also cultural, it's social, it's institutional. It's affecting everything, high streets having their shops boarded up, neighborhoods deteriorating, but also more broadly, housing crisis, as you said, mass immigration crisis, social care crisis, cost of living crisis, NHS impairment crisis. But the problem is, the overarching frustration and hopelessness is that there's nobody in power who seems to have a clue how to fix any of that. In fact, actually, people now think that our leaders, whether by design or incompetence, have been complicit in causing all of that damage. They think that our elite class, our politicians, the media, the police, the civil service, have another agenda, and they aren't acting in the interests of the British people. You add in multiculturalism to that and mass immigration where you do feel like strangers. And on top of it all, we have this long assault, this war of attrition on British self-confidence. These constant attacks on our heritage, on our culture, and on our identity. And when you add all of that together, that's a pretty potent poison.
I mean, the idea that our politicians are to blame does have some credence, doesn't it? I mean, what we see around us reflects deliberate, specific political choices. It was a political choice taken by parties on both the left and the right to pursue mass immigration. It was a political choice to deregulate financial services, which played a big role in causing the great financial crash. It was a political choice to remain committed to the ECHR, to end things like the Rwanda plan, to remove an active deterrent for illegal migration. It's a political choice not to invest in the left-behind regions, to focus on building an economy around London. I mean, this decline, which seems to be the word of the moment, is reflecting a public that I think can see through both the established left and the established right.
And that's why we see the exasperation. That's why we see the rise of alternatives right now, because the British people feel betrayed. Again and again, they have voted for one thing and they've got something else. And, mass immigration is the greatest act of harm in our Long Island story, far more consequential than the Brexit and the EU referendum. Yet you were given a vote on that. The British people were never consulted about this. And that is so consequential, I would say more damaging than the cost of fighting the Second World War. That's what sticks in the craw. That's what's so relevant here. And of course, we know that, increased ethnic diversity, all the economic evidence and sociological evidence shows us that increased ethnic diversity leads to a lowering of social trust, makes people feel like strangers in their community. They become more reclusive. They have fewer friends. They go out less. They stay home and watch television. They get involved in community associations left. There's a drop in civic pride. Buildings begin to deteriorate. There's vandalism and crime rising up. That's all down to deliberate policies that this government has embarked upon for 25 years. We've had more immigration in 25 years than the last 2,000 years. This is why people feel like strangers. Their towns and cities have changed beyond all recognition from from how it used to be when they grew up. And to feel dispossessed from your own homeland, your own territory, is of course a cause of depression.
Well, let's bring in the panel. Billy Coulson from the Good Growth Foundation. Decline, the word of the moment for many people out there, a sense that the best days are behind us. What do you think's at the root of this?
I really think it's the economic situation the country's in. I'm not at all surprised by that poll about decline you've been bringing up. From our research, that is exactly what we've found as well. But mostly it is the economic situation that is driving a lot of this desperation in people. The cost of living crisis is at the heart of everything people talk about. So
just a thought experiment for a minute, because folks that lean to the left say it's all about the economy. Folks that lean to the right tend to say, actually, it's about culture, migration, demography. So if we had a stable, growing economy, growth rates of 3-4%, we had living standards, gently rising, you think people would not be saying, that they feel like strangers in their own country, they would be feeling pretty satisfied with the state of British society?
I think people would be more optimistic, yes. We can see that like when we speak to focus groups and in polling, and we often look at reform voters as well as Labour reform switchers and Conservative voters as well, people are not against other people coming to this country. Often they're incredibly, they like the idea, they like Britain being a place that people want to come. The problem is when public services are in the state that they are in, when we have not seen investment in the NHS for so long, people really fear that that they're, that it will continue degrading our resources, basically.
Esther Krakue, is the economy stupid?
Well, partly, but everything is linked to immigration, one way or another. So the idea that, the economy, or if we speak in real terms, people having more money in their pocket makes them feel like, communities that are self-isolating down the road that, they don't identify with anyway, somehow just vanishes as a source of concern for voters is completely untrue. Of course, the economics plays into it, but you have to look at it from, again, a critical perspective. If you have more people in this country coming from parts of the world where they're willing to take lower wages, for example, you put a downward pressure on wages. If you go to parts of the country like Boston and Skegness, where you could actually, back in the early 2000s, have earned an average wage in the port as for like £200, and they say actually these unions and this influx of Lithuanian workers, for example, has driven us down to £10 an hour, and so our max we can take home a day is £90. Again, that's one of the economics of it fundamentally, but it's also, we don't know these people, we don't know the values that they have. They probably don't share it with us because they self-isolate, and we've had this toxic combination of short-term thinking amongst our politicians. We've had this toxic combination of communities being allowed to self-isolate and not adopt British values, and then also the pressure that this mass wave of people is putting on our public services. You can't tell the British public to invest more to accommodate all these people from other parts of the world coming in. They haven't invested in Britain. It's not for them. The NHS and our roads and our schools and all of that, you can't tell us to pump more of our taxpayer money that we're already hard struck to get in the first place to accommodate people coming in from other parts of the world. That's not how this works. There has to be a social contract. So it's a combination of things, but it's mainly short-term thinking. And you can see that from not just the Blair government, but for the Boris Johnson government, 2 million people in 2 years. It's obscene.
Well, it's also, 81% of all people migrating into Britain last year
are not here to work. So this idea that they come and pay taxes
not only came for reasons other than to work, but came from outside of Europe. And there was a cultural question around how do you integrate people from Nigeria, Pakistan, China?
That could be because we left the EU.
Well,
we had a lot
of clear
of
policy decision of Boris Johnson.
It was a clear policy decision by
Rafe,
Kevin Badenoch.
if I can just quickly come back. This cultural question then, okay, so what on earth... There are lots of people out there who will throw their hands up and say, okay, right, it's all it's difficult, things are declining, not a big fan of the current government. 3/4 of people planning to vote for reform are saying they feel like strangers in their own country. Just give me something to cling to here. What's the positive, forward-looking, this is what we need to do at the next election, or this is what we need to do about this problem?
Or two prongs. So in the past, when all countries have economic peaks and troughs, right? But after the Second World War, in the 70s, we were still culturally intact. We were a homogenous population. We had common shared beliefs. It was only the classing that distinguished us. It is harder now because we don't have that. We do have actually cultural differences here, which make us a very disparate population. But the key thing is you need to have a reverse of the long march through the institutions. We need, in 1979, Thatcher unveiled with Keith Joseph an economic revolution that fundamentally changed the face of the nation. We need someone to do this for culture and society and for our institutions. And it's a 30-year project, I'm afraid to say. It's an anti-Blair that we need.
I think I've often talked about this on the show. I think we need a factory reset, a reset to before we had the New Labour cultural revolution that the Conservatives continued and which still remains around us today. And that's not to say you should live your life by wanting to go back. It's saying that actually our common law tradition, our belief in free speech, our belief in controlled borders, in welcoming genuine refugees, but having slow demographic change that's manageable and we can integrate. Let's push for this factory reset. Well, thank you to Rafe and my panel for now.